It is 6 o'clock. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Our doors will remain open for those that are joining us late. And tonight's webinar presentation will begin just after I go through a few logistics for the Historical Society of Santa Rosa in our presentation tonight. My name is Leslie Graves. I'm your MC and your Zoom host. And most importantly, I want to welcome you to a webinar presentation, which is slightly different than many of the Zoom meetings that a lot of folks are used to. A webinar presentation is one where it's much like an auditorium. Our guests that are out in the audience and our participants will be in the audience and not be viewed on the screen. Our presenter will be viewed on the screen as well as tonight's slide presentation. Um, Also, during the slide presentation, our guests that are in the audience and are joining us on Zoom will only be able to interact with us via chat. And as you type in your hellos and your thank yous and your questions or comments via chat, that chat area will not be facilitated until after the full presentation is complete, which takes approximately 1 hour. So approximately 7 o'clock this evening, we will go to the Q&A, in which I will be facilitating the questions to our presenter. And I won't necessarily be going in order, but I will get through the bulk of the questions or comments or sharing that people have done in our chat area. And at the end of this presentation, I will also go over how the Historical Society of Santa Rosa makes this available on YouTube as well. So just a brief note for this evening. Usually these webinars are not only presented on Zoom as a live webinar presentation, but are also simultaneously broadcast on Facebook. Unfortunately, tonight, due to a Zoom update, that simultaneous Facebook live presentation is unable to occur. And I believe the YouTube post will be made after this presentation, probably by tomorrow or tomorrow afternoon. So just to give you that heads up, if you have friends and family trying to watch this on Facebook, it is not being live simultaneously broadcast on Facebook, but will be uploaded onto the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's YouTube page just within the next 24 hours. So we've got over 30 people in the audience, and once again, I want to thank you so much for joining us at tonight's Historical Society of Santa Rosa's webinar presentation of Santa Rosa's Little Italy from the 20th century to today. And now I would like to welcome our presenter and give you a bit of information about our presenter. So Kathy Bertolini Dowdall is descended from two West End Italian families, the Bertolinis and the Bastonis, and has been conducting interviews with Santa Rosa's historic Italian families since 2009. She has been a member of the North Bay Italian Cultural Foundation since 1981. And you are just going to enjoy this presentation so much. Thank you so much, Kathy, for putting so much energy and time into this presentation. At this time, I will be leaving the screen and muting myself, although I will be a simple click or shout away. I will always be here, and I will be giving the presentation over to Kathy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Leslie. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. Vowels really matter with Italian names, so I'm just going to say there are some Bertolinis, but I'm a Bertolini, so just a little correction. So I'm going to start off with my next slide. Thank you. I'm going to start with the Great Migration. So nearly 13.5 million Italians left their country between 1876 and 1914. An estimated 150,000 arrived in California, not as unskilled labor, but as dispossessed skilled labor. They may have been viewed as unskilled labor, but they were not. They came as fishermen, quarry specialists, marble specialists, musicians, and a lot of agricultural workers. The agricultural workers were coming particularly from small regions in the northern half of Italy. And the climate and geography of the North Bay is known for being very similar to their homelands. Word spread through chain migration, and Santa Rosa's West End became a destination by the early 20th century for many agricultural migrants. Next slide, please. Thank you. Such as those from Tuscany and nearby regions who had become dispossessed in the podere agricultural system. The podere, or the farm, is a small to medium-sized estate. It looks like our wineries. That was worked by one multi-generational family, La Familia. They operated that estate sometimes for generations, and they worked as an economic collective. They did not own the estate, and they did not receive wages. Instead, they worked for a padrone or padrone, their landlord. Sharecropping under a moral economy known as the mezzadria, literally meaning 50-50. The mezzadria moral economy had a code of ethics that involved reciprocal obligations between the family and their padrone, as well as with other families. So there was a requirement for the harvest, and the mezzadria included obligations with families across the farms and the regions to help each other with these large harvests, share tools, to share food production of like bread, wine, olive oil, chestnut flour, one of the famine foods. You know, these things are really labor intensive, and sharing for the care and slaughter of farm animals, as well as sharing the maintenance of water systems, which were little ditch and diversion and erosion control systems. They were little, micro irrigation systems, something that we would see in the west end of Santa Rosa with our truck gardeners who did ditch irrigation on Santa Rosa Creek, same economy. Their social order and their rigorous self-governance and their collective obligations produced ethical order without citizenship. And agricultural migrants would bring this moral economy with them to the West End. Next slide, please. I'm just going to go through this. So these are the ethics that they transferred. And if you're not of Italian descent, think about your own heritage, because village life was real similar all over. It had a certain rhythm to it everywhere. And the reciprocities were a huge part of village life. So in this table, I'm just outlining the mezzadria and then kind of how I've interpreted what we've seen as a transference to the West End. So let's see. So the extended family continues as the economic unit. Reciprocity continues between families as the stabilizing force. And immigrant lodges would serve as authorities rather than the landlord. There's no longer a landlord, but the immigrant lodges become really important for brokering issues, for resolving conflicts, for being able to lend money to people when they need it. In Mezzadria, the reputation is governed access to land. You will not get land or have social standing without a good reputation. In the West End, that converts to trust and reputation. And those are used for informal lending, credit at stores, protection in the community, rather than anything with authorities. We have very few records with interactions with the police or any other authorities in the West End. They kept to themselves and they took care of their business. In Mezzadria, labor is moral proof. Endurance is virtue, and effort is visible. In the West End, how hard a family works is respected over how much they own. Bakers, cannery workers, truck gardeners, all command respect because work is respected. In Mezzadria, quiet endurance is expected and suffering is normalized. In the West End, this continues. And without our oral histories, there are few records of hardship. In Mezzadria, men control formal labor relationships and women govern the household relationships. In the West End, this continues at the neighborhood level. Women are really ethical regulators. And in Mesozoic, landlords and the state are unreliable and extractive. And in the West End, city planners, federal agencies, the police are not trusted. And the neighborhood solves its own problems. And finally, in Mesozoic, belonging is tied to land. And in the West End, belonging is tied to the neighborhood and the places in it. And citizenship is thought of as a practice rather than paperwork. And this would end up being a difficulty in World War II. So people enacted their citizenship more than their practice. They felt like when they came here that they had agency that they didn't have in their homeland, and they would have the opportunity to embody citizenship. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to use this. I did a deep dive on this one. I would love to do it for all the families who'd like it done, but this is the Luggiana region in northern Tuscany, and it's an example of chain migration from an Italian agricultural valley to Santa Rosa's West End. So remember that all those people named in that slide would at least know of each other at the community level and would have been traveling up and down this valley and at the time for family and community agricultural obligations. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So here's the Bastoni Ranch. It's on Ribley Road. People usually know of it because they hate the turn. They hate the hairpin turn at the ranch. So note the Podore architecture, right? This is replicating home away from home. And besides the basalt structures and the outdoor bread oven, that's Lou Bertolini making bread, there are basalt-lined canals that convey the farm's water. The three Bastoni brothers came from Filatiera, and they would live here and they would raise their children here together. And then eventually two of the kids of Francesco and Luigi's sons would move to the West End and start the Franco-American bakery. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay, and then other West End family surnames. So from Magnino, Paul Bertoli, one of our pioneer migrants. He came really early. He arrives in Santa Rosa in 1875, and he sponsors Antonio Bassignani in 1907, who arrives in the West End and works for Joe Imwally immediately. I've talked about the Bastonis from Filateria. And then from Liciana Nardi, we have Adriano Colombani, and he arrives in 1914. He works as a laborer. And some of our family records, he actually worked in the stone quarries. And his residence is listed as the famous 509 Adam Street, which is Lena's boarding house. He sponsors his cousin Aristide Bertolini in 1920, who, when he arrives in the West End, works as a cook at Lena's. And then he works for Imwally, and then he works in the cannery, where he's going to meet his future wife, Stella. And this is in keeping with, Gay LeBaron's interviews and reporting on cannery life, how many people met their spouses there. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So in case you have never seen chain migration, an affidavit before, here we have the Adriano's promise to be responsible for Aristide, and he's proving his reliability to take the risk by stating his employment, his residence, all of his financials, and he's actually fairly wealthy for the time. He makes $6 a day at 22. He's got $700 in the bank, and he has $200 cash on hand. So that's all of his financials to prove that he can care for his cousin. Every single one of these folks would have to have an affidavit proving that they could take care of the family that was being sent over. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So this messy slide, it shows the Luggiana families and their chain migration. It's just mapped onto the West End neighborhood, just to give you a picture. And as their families grew, their residences grew. They would live very close to each other. The businesses they would own, the neighborhood immigration halls that would be involved, like the La Impendenza and the Liberty Halls. And And if you just look, like, you can see that there's like the Bassignanis all on like Garden and Willow, and they're all living really close together on the same block. And then they have their garden just right down the street. The Bassignani garden is just a little, it's actually a trail down the street. And my interviewee, Peter Bassignani, drew the trail for me, for his little trail that he would go to the garden in. Okay. So next slide, please. Thank you. Many of the new arrivals found work in the cannery. And though the cannery was an institution of industrial agriculture, something that a lot of the folks weren't used to, many Italian immigrants would have the skills it needed, right? They knew how to care for fruits and vegetables. The Cowpack cannery was right in the middle of the neighborhood, and the small truck gardens and ranches supplied much of the produce. Fruits and vegetables were cut and peeled, labeled, packed. Then they shipped to suppliers like Levi Zentner or by train. From April through October, men, women, and children worked 18-hour shifts. Everyone I interviewed either worked in the cannery themselves or they had parents who did. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Life itself was in the neighborhood where spaces could be Italianized. Here's a full map of the historic West End neighborhood. And so we're looking at Sanborns for the part that is in town, but then also the gardens, which were very much part of the neighborhood. And they are on an air photo, but you can see them labeled. Okay. For the first 3 decades of the 20th century, block books show that first-generation Italians made up most of the neighborhood's population. And as recently as the 1970s, it was still called Italian Town or Dago Town or Tar Flat. The North Pacific Railroad tracks formed a hard eastern boundary, with children from the neighborhood forbidden to cross it. The western boundary was marked by the 4 truck gardens, whose vegetable rows are visible on this air photo. You can see the vegetable rows. They were owned you know this, by the Bertolinis, Bassignanis, Bertolis, and the Imwallis. Next slide, please. Thank you. Immigrant organizations like La Pendenza were both social clubs and the institutional backbone of immigrant communities like Santa Rosa's West End. They replaced old world authorities like padrones and served as economic safety nets for injured workers, burial services, support for widows. Bands like the La Pendenza Band made the immigrant community visible and legitimate in public space. They're organized, they're well dressed, they're proud. Don Presenti Tarpley in our interviews tells how the 40-piece all-male band crossed that invisible line that separated the West Side from downtown Santa Rosa by marching in the town's parades, especially the Rose Parade. Next slide, please. Thank you. La Pendenza Hall was right behind Franco-American Bakery. The La Pendenza themselves, they formed in 1920. They disbanded in 1927, but they matriculated into other social clubs. And so, you know, as the lodges closed, social clubs opened. And so we had Sons and Daughters of Italy. We had the North Bay Italian Culture Foundation, even though that's much later, like in the 1980s, but we have the Italian American Club, IAC, the Italian American Club, that's still serving dinners at the vets. So, so that's what would happen, is that you would have cultural clubs, social clubs, as the lodges were not as needed over time. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Liberty Hall was another social club, and it was a neighborhood institution, and it was located in the basement at 12 Pearson Street. Dances and meetings were held there. Note the stonework. There's quite a bit of informal and less than professional stonework in the neighborhood. You know, a lot of men, before they came over from this region, would do periodic work in the quarries. So they were not stonemasons per se, but they worked in stone at some times of the year or at some times when they needed to for their family. So there's a lot of skills that you'll see in the West End. There's a lot of borders, stonework like this at Pearson. I encourage you, if you're in the neighborhood, to look for it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, 11 Pearson's showing a different part of the neighborhood. And so this is two pictures. So one, the first picture is the side of the building, and then the second picture is the front of the building. So what you're looking at here is a typical neighborhood home, and it was used for several generations of related Italian families. They would sell it to each other. They would live back and forth in this house. And what's often called a Mediterranean domestic layering, they would have domestic life essentially vertically. So the basement was used for making wine, vinegar, sausage, cold storage. Often it's where the men hung out. Even in my lifetime, all of those things were true. And it was used largely for family gatherings, for holidays. Chicken runs and rabbit sheds were kept, frowned upon by city planners and not up to code, but it was actually just cultural continuity. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Yards were productive landscapes. If there was a lawn, it was pulled out for a garden, where front and backyards were planted in familiar ways with familiar vegetables. Almost every house had a fig tree, and parkways were planted with walnuts and fruit trees. You might still see them, adjacent to the road. I've still seen some remnant like walnut trees in the parkways in the West End. And in my interviews with descendants, we discussed the great popularity of vine-covered arbors or pergolas, as you can see here, sometimes built over driveways for gathering when not being used to park vehicles. Like this one, for the very important event of Alfred Becchetti's baptism, more than a few families had this arrangement. And so in this picture, this lovely family picture, you can see the ruts, the tire ruts in the foreground, when this serves, most days as a place where the trucks are parked. And then you can see the vines where, it serves as a pergola for and transforms into for family events. And I hope you can see that way in the back. There's an accordion player. There's a bunch of musicians in the back. They're hard to see, but of course the musicians were there. And then more than a few yards had crushed oyster bocce courts. As Peter Bassignani said, they were everywhere. He said, and he's not the only one, but in my interviews, that was the sound of the neighborhood, was the bocce ball courts. They were strictly male. There were no women playing bocce ball. That's something that we get to do now, but that wasn't the case then. In fact, women were the ones on Sunday who took the kids to church, and the men drank and played bocce. So that was a standard Sunday. Okay. In my interviews, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Map-based interviews. So this is our big map, which we have our interviewees make notations on. So they just write in there all of their trails, their chicken coops, their bocce ball courts. This is how they make their memory maps. And then next slide, please. No, wait, sorry. That's okay. You can leave it here. Either way, we do place-based interviews where we drive or walk around the neighborhood. And our interviewees tell me their recollections. And this is an extremely powerful way to interview someone. So if you're thinking about doing family interviews, get your mom in the car. This is one of the really fantastic ways for them to remember deeply what happened there. Okay. Okay. So next slide, please. Thank you. So here I am. I'm interviewing Peter at his house on Willow. And so we use the Oral History Association guidance, whereby the interviews are the intellectual property of the interviewees. Um, and then we do capacity building for them. So we build out their library. It's something almost everybody always needs to do, and they don't have time to do. So we scan all their pictures for them. We keep copies of the pictures as well. In our project files, everything's going to Gay LeBaron's library. Everything's approved by the interviewees. Nothing's going that they don't want to go, but we'll certainly scan things that are not going to go. And then the interviewees receive anything we produce, and they have veto power over anything we produce. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So Peter is from a truck gardening family. And here is a harvesting calendar that we created and over several Peter's interviews. We spent a lot of time on salsify, but but this is really interesting. This is something that I think is valuable in the neighborhood. I think it's valuable if you yourself wanted to think about if you wanted to make an Italian garden. If you live in the neighborhood and you are looking to see if there's any remnant vegetation left that's in your yard, there's just a lot of value. It's kind of beautiful. It's a lot of value. And just looking at essentially their annual calendar. And we should be, and we can map onto this calendar the the holidays and the sacred days that would have been respected for this. There was planting by the cycles of the moon. There was planting by saints' days. These are things that traveled, with our immigrants. Okay. And then next slide, please. Thank you. So here's a chronology based on dates and events from our interviews, and it's layered in with historic events and references, as well as documents from the recorder's office, like applications for water rights, home sales and purchases, births, deaths, mortgages, just essentially, everything that we can find layered in with oral history reporting. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. And then we also make a memory map. So this is Peter's memory map. And, note the bocce ball court and also the bunkhouse for their workers. So they had workers come during parts of the harvest. And I know that he talked to me about, they drank watered down wine as their drink of, during the day when they were working. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's the Bertolini interviews. If you guys know the Bertolini family, then you'll know that that's Lou and Larry in the foreground with me. But the Bertolinis operated as a group, so I could only do interviews with all 7 of them, and it was kind of fun. I love doing interviews. I've worked with different cultures on interviews, and I think it's my favorite when there's family members present that are learning from from the interviewees, and can help and assist and are able to learn their heritage, and also when people have someone to talk to, they are able to remember more. So it's worked out really well when we're able to interview people in groups. Peter Nello had passed away pretty recently before that, so Peter didn't have that luxury. Okay, let's see. Next slide, please. And here's the Bertolini harvesting calendar. This is something that we'll do with every gardening family that wants to be interviewed. And so this is, yeah. So again, this is their annual order at their farm. Okay, and then next slide. And again, here's their chronology. Again, you can see a lot of chattel mortgages and stuff. One of the things that came to pass in this particular, doing this research was the water rights issues and looking at the confusion and the misunderstandings about water rights and getting water rights legally. I think that that's like, kind of an immigrant problem, understanding what the paper means and whether your paper says you've been rejected or not. So I know that that was kind of a surprise. And then also um, just these young guys in the 1920s clubbing together, four in a group, buying land together so that they can have a garden. Okay, and then next slide, please. And then this is just the memory map. And so and we have an inset for this memory map too, but this memory map just shows, the Bertolinis had the worst land. They were on the other side of the creek. They had the worst drainage. They had the worst land. And anytime somebody else dammed anywhere on the creek, it really affected them. And that was actually, the water rights issue was a big issue on Santa Rosa Creek because if you think about them coming from their homeland where water rights were communal, and you would never have dammed something without having talked to everyone collectively before making that decision. And I think that that was probably some of what drove a lot of the anger about how water was being handled on Santa Rosa Creek. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, and then the Imwallis, the oldest family, and Joe's, his dad is German, but his mom is a Bacigalupi. And so, Joe's been part of our Italian community for a long time. And so we're interviewing Joe and his wife Marie here in their kitchen. And this is our initial interview, and we'll be continuing with our interviews. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then the Lazzinis. So we did do an initial interview with Ray and Kathy together. Ray, of course, has passed away. And so we're gonna, Kathy and I have a commitment to do more interviews real soon. And so they were a market family. If you've known the Lazzinis, they have been they were in the marketing business for years and years. Okay, next slide. And then I talked about Don Pezenti Tarpley, and he's from a musical family. They came over as musicians, and he continued that musical tradition. In his profession at Sonoma State, he was a professor of music, and then he wrote an opera called Tar Flats / West Side Story. And so he wrote an opera about the neighborhood. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So if you think about the railroad tracks are kind of like a divide or a rupture. And then the World War II became another rupture. If you think about these folks feeling like they belonged because they earned it with their labor and with their commitment and with their integrity, it was pretty shocking to be treated like this and under the Enemy Aliens Act. And so if you aren't familiar with it, you might be. It's been happening again. The US government requires non-citizens from countries at war with the United States to register as enemy aliens. That included Japan, Italy, and Germany. 600,000 Italian nationals were labeled as enemy aliens, and ultimately 1,500 were interned. Many more were arrested and detained. And in the Bay Area, that detention center was Sharp Park. Italian internments don't compare. So I don't want to, they don't compare at all to the racialized mass incarceration of 120,000 Japanese nationals and citizens. But it points to that structural bias and the prejudice that led to Italian arrests where you just had to have a rumor. We had block wardens, and there are some in the community who swear that it was the block warden that turned my nonno in. But certain occupations, such as being a lodge officer or a band leader, could also put you under suspicion, or having military service in your home country during World War I. Even though the Italians were our allies in World War I, It made you suspicious now. Any of that can make you suspect and get you arrested. Oh. And sadly, many Italians thought that they were safe because they misunderstood. They misunderstood that their declaration of intent, the first step in naturalization, was them becoming citizens. They didn't understand the paperwork. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the registration notice. And then that was pretty scary. And then next slide, please. Yeah, and so, and then here's, yeah, that's my Nano's picture from his registration card. And so that confusion, yeah, it just, and you can see why, because if you actually had a declaration of intent, you got some rights. You were allowed to vote locally, you could purchase land, you could register for the draft. So, if you didn't understand fully what you're looking at, you were thinking that you were either a citizen or on your way to becoming a citizen immediately. Okay, and then next slide, please. Thank you. So if you haven't seen one of these before, I put it in here. This is Rita Bertolini's FBI file. It's actually several pages long, but this first page summary includes his interview when he was arrested. And so Italian neighborhoods had block wardens who enforced curfews. There were travel inhibitions. You had to live away from coastal areas. There was no burning or shortwave radios, no guns. You couldn't have, a lot of folks hunted, especially like birds in the West End neighborhood, and they couldn't have guns. And the curfew was between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And the block warden's job was to report any suspicious activity to the sheriff and the FBI. And usually the block wardens were from the community. I worked pretty closely with Larry DeStassi. He's passed away this year, but he was the interment scholar of Italian interments. And he said that was pretty common, that even though the block warden came from the community, sometimes they weren't very well liked because they turned people in. And he has, I'm now working with Christina Olivio, who has taken up his work. And I have her Excel spreadsheet, and she's been in the FBI files, and there's 250 plus Italians who were detained at Sharps Park. And so this whole business really created dread that hung over the neighborhood, and that came out in my interviews. So, there was just fear. Aristide was arrested for being out after curfew just blocks from his home by armed and plainclothes FBI agents. At the time of his arrest, he and his 13-year-old son Lou had just delivered 22 boxes of tomatoes to Levi Zittner for an urgent order to go out to a military base. Aristide was taken at gunpoint, first to the sheriff's and then to Sharps Park. And Lou was left to run home. And, of course he was terrified. Lou tells the story because he was the eyewitness. He was trying to interpret for his dad. They would have nothing of it. They wanted him to leave. And his dad was left to explain himself. And his dad could barely speak any English at all, ever. In the time I knew him, he couldn't speak English hardly at all. On Aristide's FBI statement, what you're looking at here, it says that he knew he was out after curfew, but his papers were filed, and he expected to be admitted as a citizen any day. So, of course, that wasn't the case. It was his declaration of intent. So at first, his wife Stella and their 5 kids at the time didn't know where he was. Attorney Charles DeMeo became his legal counsel, and Charles DeMeo was absolutely loved in the Italian community because anything that was needed legally, Charles DeMeo was there for the community. They were never able to visit him. There were hardships. There were wartime gas rations, and there were enemy alien travel restrictions. So eventually, after 3 months or more, 3 or 4 months, he was able to come home. He was driven home somehow, but not by family. And in the interview 50 years later with Gayla Barron, Larry talks about the experience because he had to quit school so he could run the farm at 15, and all the kids had to get extra jobs. Rita worked in Pioneer Laundry. Lou set bowling pins. He worked in the bakery. He had a newspaper route. And it just stayed a hard time. And honestly, Aristide didn't come back the same. He certainly had what we would now call PTSD, and at that time they called shell shock from World War I. I'm getting that information now, but his story to us is that he was in the Alpini. He had a lot of visible scars and a plate in his head, and the scars are in his FBI file for that matter. So to be institutionalized like that was more than he could bear. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so that the internment and that whole World War II business, let people know in the community, and especially the Japanese families in the community, that they were not equal. And let the Italian community know that they were not equal to the people who were on the other side of the tracks. And that was a rupture. It was a moral rupture. But another rupture, this one, physical rupture. The building of Highway 101 in 1949, it cut right through the neighborhood, cut it in half. And so the Italian community, it cut it in half from its church. The people who went to church were the women and the children, and women for the most part didn't drive, so they walked to church, and the freeway cut them off from church. So, and also, like I said in the beginning of my talk, the community relationships, the ongoing reciprocity that's always building trust relationships, that's always building, that moral code with each other was ruptured. Okay, let's see. And then one more. Next slide, please. Thank you. Final straw. The final straw was the urban renewal projects, where parts of the neighborhood were identified as urban blight because of their sheds and their irregular zoning and their multifamily living arrangements, which were just cultural continuity. They weren't blight, but with regard to how our ordinances were being created, which were being created right at the time that we were doing the urban renewal projects, that they were being identified in that way. Okay, and one more slide, please. I showed this one because it's such an iconic photo of the old and the new, really, so, but but that's what you had, this is 1955 on leave from the Korean War, a big, fancy car, and the old ranch. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So this is a bit interesting. Quite a few families moved to Montgomery Village, aspirationally. So once, the urban renewal happened, families moved, aspirationally, yes, they wanted to get on the other side of the tracks. That was an aspiration. But with all the places they could live on the other side of the tracks, being able to live in these little houses that are close together on the same block next to Montgomery Village with its grocery stores and its walkable life, and being in between St. Eugene's Church and Calvary Cemetery, this next generation was setting up house with the same lifeway that they had in the West End. And so there were lots of folks that moved into Montgomery Village that knew each other from the West End. Cousins lived across the street from each other. It was, a little like Little Italy East in some ways. And there was just back and forth, to go back to the West End because, of course, West End was home. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. There are still strong ties to the neighborhood today. And there are some legacy businesses, such as, next slide, please, Franco-American Bakery. So, the descendants from the neighborhood still come and go, and they visit the bakery. And then, next slide, please. And, oh, okay, Western Farm Center. And if you can see, in this slide, what I'm showing you is that there is an old structure. There's a new Western Farm Center structure, but you can see the old structure. And so when you go to Westerns, it's adjacent to the railroad tracks. You can see the exterior and the interior of it. And that was an old feed store. So that was already a feed store before Larry and Lou took it and made it into Westerns. Okay, next slide, please. And then Imwally's is the surviving truck garden. And if you haven't been there, I hope you do. It's lovely. And it's still thriving, and it gives you an opportunity to experience some of the living heritage that's still there. All three of these businesses are part of that living heritage. Okay, and then one more slide. And it's not a business, but there is DeMayo Park. And more recently, bocce ball courts were built. I think they were built by the neighborhood association, who are really taking good care of it and really were able to improve it and make it livable again during the urban blight years. It was a dangerous place to be, but they have a really strong community organization in the West End, and they have been able to protect the neighborhood. And so you want to go there, you have a, special Luther Burbank walnut tree and a lot of, just legacy vegetation there. And even across the street, you'll see there's like some basalt foundations under the house. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So our interviewees they play leadership roles. They're subject specialists. And so we have walking tours, we do public speaking, we have living heritage presentations. Next slide, please. Here we are. So here we are looking at the West End walking tour was a historical society tour that we did. We did a couple of them. And so they were with the Historical Society of Santa Rosa. You can see some of us talking in the middle with Gay. And that came from, there's going to be a next slide, but not yet. And that came from the 6th Street Playhouse ethnic neighborhood talk, where my uncle and Marie Sugiyama started talking on stage and realized that they both had ancestors who had been, detained during World War II. So we're just making history right there. And so then it was, Marie, if you remember her, she's really a go-getter, and she organized this talk for us. And we had this at the Sonoma County Museum, and it was lovely. So, thank you, Eric Stanley and Margie Purser, for organizing that talk at the County Museum. Okay, and next slide. Thank you. And so this is the 6th Street Playhouse. Nick Tippon organized this, and Nick is a descendant of the neighborhood. Nick is Filipino in Southern Pomo, and so he organized this ethnic neighborhoods panel at the 6th Street Playhouse, and it was phenomenal. We do have video recordings of it. Okay, next slide, please. And here we are, just a close-up of us on our walking tour, and you can see, that's a fig tree, and there's some grapes growing on the, banister. The fig for sure is a legacy fig, and perhaps this homeowner wanted to have grapes, but you will see legacy vegetation in the neighborhood. You know, we could do ethnobotany in the neighborhood. And so that's just something to think about. There's a lot of really great things that we could do, and that you could do in your own family. So um, let's see. Um, I think what I want to say next is, yeah. So I'd like you, yeah. So let me know. I'm going to let me know, leave your information with Leslie, and then we can get in touch if there's anything that you would like to do with this project. But we're happy to do it. So at this time, I'm I'm John. It looks like I made it through 50 minutes, and I'm happy to take some questions, or we can talk a little. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Lots of great information there. I know that we have about 40 folks online, and I'm just checking the chat area right now to find out some information. And as Kathy was saying, I'll clear that up. If you have a story to tell, or you want to share information with Kathy beyond this webinar
Mhm,
presentation,
mhm,
by all means, leave your email address in the chat. Your name will already show
mhm.
with your chat entry, and Kathy will receive all of the information from the chat this evening. So she'll be able to look over that and contact people back.
Mhm.
You might want to submit your family to be interviewed at a later time and
Mhm.
chat with Kathy about that. Be sure to let her know that in the chat. Leave your email address or contact information that you feel comfortable in leaving. You may not feel comfortable in leaving your contact information in the chat for all to see, so you can definitely contact the Historical Society of Santa Rosa to be somewhat of an intermediary to be in contact with Kathy as well.
Mhm.
And so now looking at the chat area, it looks like there's lots of input here for Kathy,
Okay.
and I'll take a look at that now. Um, as I do that, I want to thank everyone once again for coming out to tonight's webinar with the Historical Society and with Kathy. And this has been Little Italy, the 20th century to today. So thank you to Cher Innes, who's over there in the West End. I knew you were going to be online. Says
Yay.
such a rich history. Thank you for inspirational work. Mark DeBacker, also with great info, Kathy. Great presentation by Ray Johnson, a historical figure himself, right here in
Yes.
Santa
Yeah.
Rosa.
Mhm.
And of course, Margie also saying thank you so much for this presentation to the Historical Society of Santa Rosa and such great research project. And she was mentioned earlier this evening as well. And
Mm.
then Denise actually said that she went to the old Western Farm Center to get supplies for her 4-H project when she was in her teens, and
Mhm.
have now um, been going over there pretty much ever since, for over 50 years. So, yes, my family goes there as well. If you have dogs and cats and little critters at home, you definitely are a Western Farm Center fan, as my family and I are as well. And lots of thank yous coming in. Daniel Schmidt says, thank you for sharing all this information. My wife and I just moved to the West End at 303 Hewitt. We did a little digging and found the house was owned by the same Italian family for decades in the early 1900s by Tomasini and Teresa Garbani and their daughter Lillian. Pagani, and I'm not pronouncing correctly. That's my fault, not yours, Daniel, until 1972. And if you know anything about that house or the family, we'd love to know more. Um, and happy to do that offline as well. Yeah, Daniel, definitely leave your
Yeah.
email address for Kathy as well. But Kathy, does that ring a bell at all over there? The
I don't know Hewitt off
303
the top of my
Hewitt?
head, but I recognize Gwen, and she lives at 11 Pearson. I can tell you that. So and I talked about that. But I can get more information about his Hewitt home.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You're a great researcher. I mean, and I just want to take a moment. I love that you gave that tip about talking to elders and family members about their lived experiences and to drive them through the neighborhood or through what
Yeah.
was their neighborhood. And that's such a great tip because a lot of times their visual memory is so strong, and then that will cue their verbal memory. Can you tell us maybe one instance? Can you relate a story about how you did that, maybe with one of these elders? And any funny anecdotes or interesting anecdotes from that driving trip? Because I love that. And I tell you, I, as a parent, that also works with little kids, especially boys, that if you're driving, and you're not looking right into their eyes, they
Yeah.
tend to talk more in those teenage years. So I just absolutely love that tip. Can you tell us any more about that?
Well, for sure, like with Lou and the internment, like, and what he went through. So, driving that was pretty important. And because that's really locked into his memory. And he had to run across fields and stuff. On a funner level, I I went with my mom on Sunday, and she just enacted being in the neighborhood, which means I'm like, I'm on a timeline. I'm just checking a few facts, but no, we have to stop at Emily's, and she has a conversation with Joe, and then we go to Westerns, and she's just out the door, and she's off talking to everybody and buying some birdseed, and so I think what's really neat about it is, and expect this, is that it's living heritage. They will start living it, which is so rich. And we all have recording devices now on our phones. And so,
Yeah.
you can record all this. Once it's gone, it's gone. I talked tonight about people I've interviewed. Most of the people I've mentioned, I think, are not here anymore. And so
Mm,
in your own families, appreciate that family history is history. One of the things that I had to cross, I've worked with tribes a lot, and the tribal elders know that their history is important. And so when they would share with me, it was with a kind of pride about how important their heritage is. And with the Italian community, and maybe it's because they were those people that don't talk about stuff, because it's kind of built into their system to hold things close and not share anything about suffering. But they didn't see their history as history. And once we were
mm,
able to start getting them to see their history as a contribution to the larger history, then they really wanted to share more. And that was true across the board. Don Pezenti Tarpley knew that his heritage was history and that it was important. But with Peter, with my family, that took effort. Not a lot, but I mean, I had to be able to, you know, get them to understand that we all share this, that family history is always looked at as a smaller kind of history, or maybe a less significant kind of history. It's not. It's the building block to our
yeah.
local history, and that's the building block to our national history. It's the
Yeah.
bedrock of history. So
Yeah, definitely. Great point. And thank you so much for all of your work. I want to point out that Lorenzo Fischette did leave his contact information and says that his family is from the Bay Area with many similarities to the work that you've
excellent.
done here. So that's so awesome. And I want to point out, this is a great time to point out too that this webinar this evening is being recorded. And so this will be uploaded onto YouTube. So if you have family in the Bay Area, Lorenzo, that might want to see this, and it helps to spur them on into sharing some of their family history, that might be a great way to do it. And I'll talk about the Historical Society of Santa Rosa and how to get to that link for YouTube a little bit later. It's just about 7 o'clock now. We've got until 7:30, so I'm going to keep going through these questions. I
Okay.
see that there's a good amount of messages here. So Larry Crop, asks in that picture of the Bastoni property,
Yeah.
was that Pascal Bastoni in the picture? Pascal's daughter lives on that property now with her husband,
Oh, Pasquale.
who have been
Pasquale.
friends. That Oh, okay, Pasquale,
He's
that have
pronouncing
been
it the
friends
French.
of
Yeah.
his since high school. So, yeah, excuse my pronunciation. I am not Italian, if you could notice, but aspire to all of this great family and friendship. So,
No, I think
did you know
Pascal's the
that?
French way, but I'm sorry. What about Pasquale? He lived here his whole life, and now Martha, his daughter, lives there with her husband, and it's a winery now. So it's the Bastoni Vineyards.
Was that Pasquale in the picture
No,
that
that's
you
Lou.
showed?
That's Lou Bertolini.
Okay.
Lou was a baker. Lou was even a baker when he was in the military.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that's an outdoor bread oven. There's a very old article about my like bees nanny, my great great grandmother, I think, who is in this who is baking in that bread oven, Pasquale's wife. And it's a very old Press Democrat article, but you can find it. And so that bread oven has just been used over time by our family. Another picture, part of that picture too, is you can see the big barbecue, and also on this property, like a big like pit for when you killed a pig, and then you have to work with it. But
Did it
but
had a
yeah,
spit? Did it have and it like
yes,
turn the
all
pig and
yeah, all that stuff. I had
yeah.
rabbits. I had rabbits in 4-H, so and I wasn't good at it, and butchering was kind of my, that's when I failed 4-H. So
Well, it was necessity at a time, right? So we have
absolutely, no
Dr.
problem.
Deb Crippen says thanks for all the information. Gwen Wright says this was so informative. Thanks, Gwen, for being here. Kara Quant, hi, Kathy. I'm with the Prince Memorial Santa Rosa Creek Volunteer Group and would much appreciate more info on how the creek provided the neighborhood back in the day and
Mhm.
could incorporate this into a walking tour, maybe with their group.
Mhm.
So
Well, water history
Carol, definitely
everywhere.
leave your
Yeah,
information. Just a quick thing, Carol, leave your information for Kathy to reach out for you.
yeah.
And yeah, is that something that you might consider doing, Kathy?
Yeah, I think water history is really important. I think the idea of all of that kind of ditch irrigation, what Santa Rosa Creek provided us, and how important it was to the community before they covered it over with that, 3 compartment box culvert. That was another rupture actually.
Hmm.
Because Santa Rosa Creek itself was such an important part of the community. And so they paved it over.
Yeah, and the Historical Society of Santa Rosa, actually, there's another webinar that was done, I want to say up to 2 years ago, all about the creek. So look back on the archives on YouTube, and there's a number of presenters on that. Lots of great information, and check that out. I don't know, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but if you go onto the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's YouTube page, which you can link to on their website,
Yeah.
historicalsocietysantarosa.org. On the YouTube page, you'll see all of these webinars that have been recorded and downloaded onto YouTube. So you've got lots of
Yeah.
history right there at your fingertips.
Neat. Yeah.
Meredith Dreisbach says, thank you for a most informative presentation. As a fifth generation Sonoma County native with
Yeah.
Italian heritage, she found this to be most inspirational, most definitely. So,
Lovely.
Kathy, yeah.
Thank
And
you.
Marie McNaughton, I would be interested to know about architectural and ethnobotanical preservation efforts for the
Mm.
upcoming Sonoma Historian journal article. You can write to the Sonoma County Historical Society at
Yeah.
sonomacountyhistory.org. That is a whole nother can of history right there, right?
Yes,
Um,
because I'm more of an ethnographer than I am an architectural historian, and there are some extraordinary architectural historians who have worked on that history in this neighborhood. Um, and I'm happy to say what I will, but mostly what I have to say is the social history of the neighborhood and the social history in those homes more than the architectural history, which would be Marianne Hurley, and I don't know where, let's see, the original 1989, Suzanne, um, the original, like there is an original historian, etc. But we can see, if it's not me, it doesn't mean I don't know somebody who it could be or would be.
yeah, yeah,
So, you know, the ethnobotanical study is an idea I have that I think should be done. And I do think that it would be beneficial to identify, like, for example, the fig trees, and then identify the species and see, if any of them are legacy species or important species that we should be preserving before people, cut them down, and do something with their yard. Um, that I think that would be helpful.
good points. Yeah, definitely. And I see you were talking about during the presentation about the Italian heritage coming over to the West End,
Uh-huh.
migrating to the West End, and then eventually migrating a little bit over to Montgomery Village, and
Yeah.
how some of that interconnectedness of the families working together and socializing together and living in close proximity and helping each other out. I'm seeing it happen right here on the chat, by the way. We've got Daniel being helped out by Cher Innes. She's going to share some information about 303
Excellent.
Hewitt. And then, so, it's carrying on, which is a great legacy. And
Yes,
we've got
that's the best legacy.
also, what's that?
That's the best legacy. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, and then we also had Ed Silverman talking about a great presentation. One question is why the bakery was named Franco-American.
It was Franco-American before the brothers got it, even though one of the brothers' name is Frank. So it was a bakery in Italian hands, and I'm forgetting the name, um, before they got it in the 1930s. Um, but they didn't name it Franco-American. Now, it's a good question because sometimes, immigrant businesses will name something American, right? And it's a way to kind of signal that you are friendly to, the non-immigrants, right? La Impendenza, the Independence Band, is not named that for that reason, just FYI. La
Mm,
Impendenza, the band leader came from Florence, and I did a search, and there was at least one in La Impendenza band in Florence in like the 1920s. It probably has more to do with the independence movement in Italy, but
mm.
it travels fine because because it also is a value that we have here. So we have La Impendenza band, we have Liberty Hall, you know, but Franco-American it was named before they got it, and they retained the name. Um,
And it's interesting. I see Ed. I see you, Ed, even though I can't really see you. But I see in your question that you included that hyphen or dash between Franco and American. And actually, on the Franco-American bakery, they don't include that, which is a whole nother question in and of itself. Do you know the significance of why you include it or you don't include it, Kathy?
I think that used to be included. I think there used to be a dash. I should ask
Yeah.
Christina. So,
Yeah.
Christina owns it now. Her dad was Robert, so he inherited it. Robert Bastoni, unfortunately, he's passed away. He was in one of my pictures because he was on our walking tour. He gave everybody a tour of the bakery. Um, and Christina owns it now, and we can ask her. But
Yeah.
um, My sensibility is that it had a hyphen. So it
Hmm.
may, she may have made it, somebody may have made a decision, but I don't know. But that name is an old name and it was named that before they got it.
Okay. All right. It's a curiosity. We'll shelf that one for later and wait
Mhm.
for you to come back to us.
Okay.
Um, Andre says that he just retired. He has some time to help with research. How nice of you.
Oh,
And that he'll
thank
send
you.
an email. So, and if you're going to email, I would suggest reaching out to the Historical Society of Santa Rosa so that they can put you in touch with Kathy. Bill Turner. Hi, Bill Turner. Hello, sir. This has been amazing and so grateful to hear all of this history, and signs off with Bill and Rosa Turner. Um,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
oh, Marie, your name is coming up. Don't worry, I can see your name. And Marie McNaughton from the Sonoma County Historical Society.
Mhm.
And yes, referencing that water webinar. And um, let's see here. Gwen Wright says there is a fig tree on her property. And Gwen, I want to say I remember you and that you're on Pearson Street. Correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong later in the chat, but I bet you are. Lisa Kranz, hello Lisa. The creek webinar is called A Creek Runs Through It. Thank you.
Oh, that's a
I
nice.
almost said that, but I thought I would be wrong. Santa Rosa Creek and how it shaped the city, and it is on the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's YouTube channel. So there is just a plethora of
Thank you.
webinars that are recorded on the YouTube channel. I really
I know you
encourage
guys have done such a
everyone,
great job.
yeah, to look through that. That's one of the great things about doing a webinar is that on Zoom is that it's recorded.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that looks like all of the comments and the questions, lots of thank yous, lots of information going back and forth between hands there in
Excellent.
the chat. I'll look for any other questions that people are putting out there. I also wanted to ask you, you talked about maybe an association, I want to say at one point, um, for interview resources. What was that
Oh,
used
yeah,
to
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
used
The
so that
oral
you
history,
know how to
yeah, yeah,
interview
yeah.
people?
The Oral History Association. The
Okay.
Oral History Association, they are very, very generous. They have a lot of stuff that's free on their website. And it's a fabulous and safe way to interview people because they retain all the title. And then there's a narrator release form, and they sign the release form and if there's any conditions for the release or not. And so that creates a real safe space for your interviews if you're going to be putting your interviews in an archive or anywhere else beyond your family. And but also there's guidance for interviewing your family or interviewing anybody, and it's free. So even the books that are for purchase are really inexpensive.
Okay. That's great to know. And probably available at the at one of our libraries as well, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I also wanted to ask, because you mentioned about Highway 101
Yeah.
and when that was being constructed, that cut off, the women and the families from going to church.
Very
And I
difficult.
wanted to ask, what did they revert to? Like, what did a church end up popping up in someone's front yard or in
So they
someone's
had to get
driveway
they
or?
had to get rides, and it isn't just because
Okay.
they were physically cut off from walking. It became less
Hmm.
safe. A lot of the blight started with that highway going in. And
Mm.
so it became less safe as a walking town. And so, you know, and once blight starts, it spreads. And, and then less investments put in a neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. But it just became a less safe place. And so it was a much harder. All these women walked, when and probably if there's anybody from the, who's like a fifth generation Sonoma County person, that you walked around with your nanny or your grandma and you walked miles to go visiting and stuff. So to, so to kind of cut us off from St. Rose Church, which is the center of, you know, um, outside the neighborhood, the center of life and of all of our rituals and, birth, death, communion, confirmation, all the big things
Yeah.
happen there. So that was significant. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was harder to walk there by a lot because now there were those arteries that go onto the freeway that are dangerous to cross. Remember, even now, if you try to walk from the west end, like into downtown, it's kind of a little more difficult. Um, if you try to go to St. Rose Church, you'll see what I'm talking about. But also, it became really unsafe. It was pretty blighted. I spent a lot of time down there, at my nanny's house when they lived at 123 West 8th Street after they left Trowbridge. And, DeMayo Park wasn't safe. It, it we didn't have an easy way to go to St. Rose Church. There was a lot of things that were hard to do
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
walker. And all the women are walkers, which is part of why I think that they just love Montgomery Village. It's a little walking community again. And right by,
Yeah, definitely.
I don't remember the
Yeah.
term, but there's an Italian term about living within the sound of the bell tower. To be able to hear the bells is like the
Oh,
ideal
okay.
place to live. And so it was that, right? We always could hear the bells of St. Eugene's. So it had that. And we were right by Calvary Cemetery, which, um, Italians, like a lot of people, take their um, death rituals pretty seriously. There are Mediterranean mausoleums in the old part of the cemetery for a lot of the Italian families, like the Bastonis. And then there's a lot of Italians that are in the crypts as well. There's a lot of Italian architecture in the cemetery. That's another fun place. If you like cemeteries, that's a fun place to go look at a lot of that, um, monumental architecture and what some of the stonemasons have done in the Calvary Cemetery.
Yeah. Well, Marie McNaughton um, brings up that there's interesting references to the series of ruptures
Yeah,
to the community, like Highway 101 and the creek being, uh, you know, dismantled by the cementing over. And she would like to learn more about the related scholarship.
okay.
Um, so yeah, lots of information out there. I know, Kathy, you've this is a project that's ongoing. Is that correct for
Yeah,
you?
yeah, it is. Yep, exactly. This is an ongoing project. My highest priority is to interview people for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's an ongoing project. I foresee it being an ongoing project, indefinite project.
Yeah. Well, thank you for again for all of the work that you have done. It was great to see, familiar faces like Joe M. Wally in the presentation there at the M. Wally
Yeah,
Gardens. I he was just one of the at the Rose Parade this last year in 2025. He was one of the grand marshals. There were
excellent.
three grand marshals, and he was one of them. So you think about that, that line of history, and
Exactly.
unfortunately, that the history of the Italian immigrants in the West End and World War II, and that hard line of not going any further east than the railroad tracks. And now you have Joe and Wally as the Grand Marshal of the Rose Parade.
Right? Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
you've a great celebration right there. And he was also awarded and recognized in the ag community last year as well. So
Exactly.
and yet you can go and still buy your leeks and your potatoes and your mushrooms and a few outdoor plants and whatnot and soil and things like that right there at Imwali Gardens. which is lovely to be able to do. Um, and
Definitely.
see a real working farm right in the basically
Yes.
the middle of downtown, right?
That's a working farm, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the Italians were very civic minded. I think they loved it. I think some of it came with them, that level of honor about being a citizen, whether you're legally a citizen or not, but being someone of good standing and honor. But I also think that they took a lot of joy in being citizens and getting to have that kind of agency that they did not have in the old country. You know, to be able to buy your own land, to be able to have your own farm, to be able to be a contributor. You know, it's so important. I know. So all the people I interviewed to be contributors, and they work with me in that light, you know, kind of in that spirit. And so, and we've seen it. Everybody from, the Trionis, and you mentioned, Joe, the Bastonis. There's so many of the Italian families that have been big contributors to our community. So I think that's lucky.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't want that to not leave space for the other work that you've done with our indigenous communities.
Oh yeah.
And I want, that we talked about that a little bit in your the information when people sign up, they could read a little bit more about you right there in the registration page. But I encourage everyone to put Kathy on your bookmarks, to look her up, to find out more information about Kathy and about all the things that she's done, all the things that she's doing. Keep an eye out for her because she's doing the work to really tie these histories into what we know in our present day
Hmm.
about our Italian ancestors and culture and our indigenous communities
Hmm.
here in Northern California and in Sonoma County. And just want to thank you for all of that because I know that's not just an ongoing project, but it's a life work. And you're inspiring, to say the
Thank you.
least.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Leslie. Thank you for organizing all this and, you know, putting up with my stress.
You know, and I must say, putting together a PowerPoint and speaking in front of a group in which you can't see them is very stressful. And it's so lovely. You did such a great job, and you really did an honor to all of the people that you've interviewed and that you've talked to, and all of those families and their heritage. One more from the chat, Karen Stone, um, uh, capitalismo
And now
refers to the
these more.
food that is produced within the sound of a church's bell. That's
Oh,
spelled. Do you recognize campanalismo?
no, but I'm going
So
to look it up.
Campanalismo. So that'll be in the chat so you can see that. Again, Kathy is going to receive a
Thank you.
full
Thanks, Karen.
copy of all of this information that everybody put in the chat, all the questions, all the contact information. Kathy will receive that in an email from me. And once we finish out this webinar, we will also be going over this recording and then looking to download this onto the YouTube channel. And everyone is more than welcome. We're so glad that we're able to do this. And really, who's really doing this? The Historical Society of Santa Rosa. So the Historical Society of Santa Rosa, which you can find at historicalsocietysantarosa.org. Please visit their page, and if you're not already a member, become a member, buy a membership for a friend, for a family member. Look at all of the information that they have on their website, including their Facebook link and their YouTube page link. and links to their newsletters. And you can also make a donation if you're already a member and tell them that they're doing a great job putting on these webinars, and look for other presentations in person throughout the year as well. So hats off to the Historical Society of Santa Rosa for putting on webinars like this and so many others for the past few years that you can look at on their YouTube page. I want to say thank you again to everybody for joining us. Thank you for participating in this live webinar, and thank you for all of the wonderful questions. Thank you so much to Kathy Bertolini Dowdall for being here, for putting so much work and energy into it, and bringing all of this rich history forward for all of us to participate in and be a part of as well. So at this point, we are just shy of 7:30, and we're going to end out the night by again thanking all of you and wishing you all well this evening in your travels going forward. Be safe, and that's all for tonight. Good night.